In August 636 CE, on the dry plains near the Yarmouk River, one of the most decisive battles in history unfolded. A battle that would not only reshape the Middle East, but also seal the fate of the Byzantine Empire in the region forever. On one side stood the Byzantine Empire, an ancient powerhouse, the last stronghold of Rome's legacy, a superpower with a professional army, sophisticated war tactics, and the resources of an empire stretching from North Africa to Anatolia. On the other side, the Rashidun Caliphate, a rising force, barely a decade old, outnumbered, unfamiliar with the terrain, and facing an empire that had stood for 1,000 years. Yet in just 6 days, they would achieve the unthinkable. How did an army one-third the size of its enemy manage to crush one of the most advanced military forces of its time? Why did the Byzantines fail, despite having the advantage of numbers, cavalry, and defensive positions? And how did this battle pave the way for the Islamic conquest of the Levant, Egypt, and beyond? This is the story of the Battle of Yarmouk, the turning point in the Arab-Byzantine wars, and one of the most decisive battles in world history. Welcome to Infinitia Verity, where we analyze history's greatest events with facts, strategy, and depth. To understand the significance of the Battle of Yarmouk, we need to go back a few years to a time when two great powers were locked in a seemingly endless struggle. The Eastern Roman, or Byzantine Empire, and the Sasanian Persian Empire had been fighting each other for over 2 decades. Their wars drained their treasuries, exhausted their armies, and left their borders vulnerable. Then, in a shocking turn of events, a new force emerged from the deserts of Arabia. A force that neither empire had paid much attention to, a group of warriors united under a single banner, Islam. The Byzantine Empire was still one of the most powerful forces in the world, but it was crumbling from within. Less than a decade earlier, Emperor Heraclius had led a miraculous counterattack against the Sasanian Persians, reclaiming Jerusalem and other lost territories. However, victory came at a cost. The war had devastated the empire's economy and military. Byzantine forces were spread thin, defending vast borders from Persians, Slavs, and Berbers. Heraclius was a brilliant strategist, but he was also facing a broken empire. His soldiers were exhausted, his treasury was nearly empty, and his enemies were stronger than ever. Meanwhile, the Rashidun Caliphate had rapidly expanded under Caliph Abu Bakr and his successor Umar ibn al-Khattab. Just a few years earlier, Arabia had been divided into warring tribes. Now, it was united under Islam, and its armies were winning battle after battle. The Arabs had already taken control of Damascus and parts of Syria, and now they were advancing deep into Byzantine territory. Their soldiers fought not for gold or empire, but for faith, unity, and the promise of victory. But here's where things get interesting. The Arabs weren't just skilled fighters. They were tactically brilliant. Unlike the Byzantines, they weren't weighed down by complicated supply chains or a rigid command structure. They could move fast, adapt to the battlefield, and strike where their enemies least expected. On paper, the Byzantines should have crushed the Arab armies. They outnumbered them at least 3-1. They had heavily armored cavalry, skilled archers, and elite foot soldiers. They were fighting on familiar ground near the Yarmouk River. They had war elephants, yes, actual war elephants. Yes, the Byzantines thought elephants would terrify the Arab warriors. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly go as planned. But if the Byzantines had all these advantages, then why did they lose so badly? Why did Yarmouk become one of the biggest defeats in Byzantine history? The answer: strategy, leadership, and the power of an idea. By 636 CE, the Byzantine Empire was on high alert. The Arab Muslim forces had already taken control of Damascus, and their next target was the vast lands of Syria and Palestine. Emperor Heraclius, ruling from Constantinople, had to make a choice: fight or lose the empire's eastern provinces forever. His decision: one last massive counteroffensive. The Byzantines gathered one of the largest armies they had assembled in decades, between 80,000 and 150,000 soldiers, depending on historical sources, and they sent them straight to face the Arab forces at the Yarmouk River. Strength: huge numbers. They outnumbered the Arabs at least 3-1. Heavy cavalry, cataphracts, the medieval version of tanks, these riders were heavily armored and nearly unstoppable in open battle. War elephants, a psychological weapon meant to break enemy morale. Defensive positioning, they controlled the high ground near the Yarmouk River. Weaknesses, multinational army made up of Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Christian Arabs, all with different languages and fighting styles. Low morale, many soldiers were exhausted from fighting the Persians. A divided command structure, multiple generals, each with their own strategy and no clear leadership. Strength, highly mobile cavalry, fast, strategic, and able to strike where least expected. United under one command, General Khalid ibn al-Walid was a military genius who had never lost a battle. Superior discipline, Arab forces used smaller, flexible units that could quickly adapt to the battlefield. Unshakable morale, they believed they were fighting a holy war and were fearless in battle. Weaknesses, outnumbered estimates suggest they had between 25,000 and 40,000 troops. Lack of armor. Arab soldiers were lightly armored compared to Byzantine cataphracts. Fewer siege weapons, limited in their ability to break fortified positions. The Byzantines thought they had the perfect plan, use their superior numbers, crush the Arabs in one decisive battle, and end the Muslim advance. But Khalid ibn al-Walid had a plan of his own. Khalid knew his forces were outnumbered, so he avoided a full frontal assault. Instead, he used cavalry raids to weaken enemy supply lines and harass the Byzantines before the battle even started. The Arabs forced the Byzantines to stay in their positions for weeks, tiring them out in the harsh summer heat. Many Byzantine soldiers began deserting before the battle even started. Khalid organized his forces into 5 separate divisions that could act independently. This made them more flexible than the Byzantine army, which relied on a rigid formation. The Byzantines had been drawn into a trap. They didn't know it yet, but in just a few days they would suffer one of the worst defeats in their history. The stage was set. 2 mighty armies faced off near the Yarmouk River in August 636 CE. On one side, the Byzantine forces, numbering anywhere between 80,000 to 150,000 soldiers, stood in a solid defensive formation. Opposing them, the outnumbered Arab army, estimates range between 25,000 to 40,000 warriors, waited for their moment to strike. This would not be just a battle, it would be a turning point in world history. For 6 days, the two sides would engage in a brutal, intense struggle that would leave the Byzantine Empire permanently weakened and pave the way for Islamic expansion across the Levant. The Byzantines strike first, hoping to overwhelm the smaller Arab force with sheer numbers. Their left wing, led by the Armenian general Vahan, attacked the Arab right flank. At the same time, their heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, charged into the Arab center. The Arab forces held their ground, but suffered heavy losses. The Byzantine cavalry was heavily armored and nearly impossible to break in a direct fight. Instead of retreating or pushing back head-on, he ordered his cavalry to strike at the enemy's sides, harassing them from all directions. This slowed the Byzantine advance and prevented them from fully breaking through the Arab lines. By the end of day 1, the Byzantines had gained some ground, but they failed to deliver a decisive blow. Khalid knew they would attack again the next day, so he adjusted his tactics. The Byzantines unleashed their war elephants, hoping to break the Arab ranks. The sheer size and force of the elephants caused panic among the Arab troops. The Arab right wing began to fall back, dangerously close to retreating. The elephants acted as a moving fortress, breaking through ranks and trampling anything in their way. He ordered his cavalry to target the elephants' legs and eyes with spears and flaming arrows. At the same time, his light infantry used hit-and-run tactics to exhaust the heavily armored Byzantine soldiers. After hours of battle, several elephants collapsed and the rest were forced to retreat. With the elephants neutralized, the Arabs rallied and counterattacked. But the battle was far from over. The Byzantines, frustrated by their lack of progress, launched a full-scale assault on all fronts. Vahan ordered a massive attack using cavalry and archers, hoping to push the Arabs back for good. The Arab lines bent, but they didn't break. Khalid had structured his forces to absorb the impact and then counterattack. He ordered his reserves to reinforce key positions at the right moments. He feigned retreats in certain areas to lure Byzantine forces into overextending. His cavalry launched night raids on Byzantine camps, disrupting their supplies and morale. By the night of day 4, the Byzantines were tired, frustrated, and losing confidence. They still had the numbers advantage, but their morale was crumbling. Khalid sets up a massive trap. He secretly redeploys his cavalry behind the Byzantine army in the dead of night. The Byzantines, thinking they still controlled the battlefield, prepare for another all-out attack. Khalid waits for the perfect moment to spring the trap. As the Byzantines charge, Khalid's cavalry strikes their rear, cutting off their retreat. The Arab forces push forward from all sides, surrounding the Byzantine army. Chaos erupts. Many Byzantine soldiers, realizing they're trapped, begin to flee. For the first time in the battle, panic spreads through the Byzantine ranks. Generals tried to reorganize their troops, but it was too late. The Arab army goes on the offensive. The Byzantines try to hold their ground, but without a secure escape route, their formations break down. Many soldiers drown in the Yarmouk River as they attempt to flee. Others are cut down by Khalid's cavalry, which now controlled the battlefield. Tens of thousands of soldiers killed or captured. Vahan and most Byzantine commanders either killed or fled. The last stronghold of Byzantine power in Syria was shattered. After 6 days of brutal combat, the mighty Byzantine army was completely destroyed. The Arab forces had achieved one of the greatest military victories in history. As the dust settled on the fields of Yarmouk, the world had changed forever. The once mighty Byzantine Empire had suffered one of the most devastating defeats in its history. Tens of thousands of its soldiers lay dead or scattered. Its generals had either been slain or fled, and the eastern provinces of the empire, Syria, Palestine, and later Egypt, were now open for conquest. The loss at Yarmouk effectively ended Byzantine rule over Syria and the Levant. Emperor Heraclius, once hailed as a savior for defeating the Persians, could do nothing but retreat to Constantinople. As he left Antioch, he is reported to have said, "Farewell, Syria, what a beautiful land you will be for our enemies." Byzantine defenses in Palestine and Egypt crumbled, leading to further Arab conquests in the coming years. Yarmouk was the battle that secured the Islamic conquest of the Levant. With Byzantine resistance crushed, the Arabs quickly marched into Jerusalem, Damascus, and eventually Egypt. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the brilliant general behind the victory, had cemented his place in history as one of the greatest military commanders of all time. The speed of the Muslim conquests after Yarmouk shocked the world. Within just a few decades, the Islamic Caliphate expanded from the Arabian Peninsula to North Africa, Persia, and even Central Asia. One battle had created a domino effect that reshaped the political and religious map of the world. Before Yarmouk, the Rashidun Caliphate was a regional power in Arabia. After Yarmouk, it became an empire in the making. For nearly 700 years, Syria had been a vital part of the Roman and Byzantine empires. Yarmouk permanently ended Roman influence in the region. The battle proved that mobility, discipline, and superior tactics could defeat even the strongest empires. Future Islamic armies would use similar strategies to conquer Persia, North Africa, and Spain. The loss of Syria was a huge economic and strategic blow to the Byzantines. Without these territories, the empire struggled to maintain its power in the east. Had the Byzantines won at Yarmouk, history could have been very different. The spread of Islam might have been halted, and the Byzantine Empire might have survived for centuries longer in the east. But history is written by the victors. And at Yarmouk, the victors were the soldiers of the Rashidun Caliphate. The Battle of Yarmouk wasn't just about land or power. It was about the rise of a new civilization. It marked the transition from an aging Roman world to a new era of Islamic rule in the Middle East. It showed that faith, strategy, and adaptability could triumph over sheer numbers and tradition. If you walk the battlefield of Yarmouk today, the land is quiet. But buried beneath the sands are the echoes of one of the greatest battles ever fought. This was the battle that shattered an empire, built a new one, and changed the course of history forever. And that, my friends, is why the Battle of Yarmouk is one of the most important battles in world history. Thanks for watching Infinitia Verity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And let us know in the comments what other epic battles should we cover next.